All right, everyone. Well, hello and good afternoon, and welcome to our question and answer session with Sister Jeannine Gramick. My name is Kate Huffman. I'm one of the organizers of Dignity Philadelphia's 50th anniversary this year. I joined Dignity Philadelphia in 2019 when my partner Kaden and I moved to Philly. And before then, I would consider myself a lapsed Catholic. I think I found that my sexual identity and my spirituality were at odds. But coming to Dignity Philadelphia made me feel like I had a place both in my Catholic faith, in the LGBTQ plus community, and at the intersection of those identities. And it's been an absolute joy to learn about Dignity Philadelphia's history and all the people who have played major roles in that, like Sister Jeannine. And that's what's brought us here today. Last night, we presented Sister Jeannine with the Father Ron Hoskins Lifetime Achievement Award for all of her contributions to our community. And also for being the grandmother of this group in Jeannine's honor. So today, myself and Marianne Duddy-Burke, president of DignityUSA, are going to ask a few questions of Sister Jeannine about her past with Dignity Philadelphia and about her thoughts for the future in about an hour-long conversation. We'll have some time towards the end to take questions from the audience. And today's conversation is being recorded by Tolsma Productions so that we can preserve this conversation for the next 50 years and beyond. So now I will pass it over to Marianne to introduce herself and to start off our questions.
Thank you so much, Kate. And you gave me a bit of an undeserved promotion. I'm not the president of Dignity USA. That was 30 years ago. Now we are led by a much more visionary and competent person, Melly Barber, out of Indianapolis, who sends her greetings. She was at an out-of-country wedding, or otherwise would have been here today. So I do have the privilege of serving as Dignity USA's executive director. And have, over my many years of working with Dignity USA, have had many, many opportunities to collaborate with Jeannine, to speak with Jeannine. But one of my favorite stories is that very early on in my relationship with my spouse and mother of our children, Becky, it was one of Becky's first sleepover weekends. And on a Sunday morning, Jeannine called me, and Becky, who had been a Sister of Mercy, was so excited that Jeannine Gramick had my phone number and was reaching out to me on a weekend. So I think that's what made her decide I was worth spending some time with. So for that, I am eternally grateful. But anyhow, we are very, very excited, and I'm very grateful to Dignity Philadelphia for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And really excited to get all of this on the record. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to begin at the beginning and ask you to think back 50 years ago. And many folks who are in this room probably have heard the story of your friendship with Dominic Bash and his essentially his challenge to you, right, that the church needed to be doing something for gays like him who were proud of who they were in their sexual orientation, but who also wanted a place to be able to practice their faith. Right. So to refresh our memories, and for those who haven't heard it, it's kind of like, the Gospels. You hear them every 3 years. Like, we have to do this. So here we are. We're going to hear a reading from the book of Jeannine and Dominic. And I'm particularly interested in knowing how you heard that request as a school sister of Notre Dame, as somebody who is deeply steeped in Philadelphia Catholic culture of the mid-20th century, and as a representative of a church institution that really hadn't been called on to deal with questions of sexual orientation or gender identity at that point in time.
Yeah. Well, as you said, Marianne, it was the Church of Philadelphia, which, as many of you know, is very Catholic. Over 50% of the population in Philadelphia is Catholic. And I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania. I was, young and vibrant in those days. And it was actually more than 50 years ago. It was 52 years ago in 1971. And I was studying, and I met Dominic through the Episcopal Church, actually. And he asked me that question, what was the church doing for his gay brothers and sisters? And at that point in my youth, I had heard, and we didn't call it lesbian or gay, and transgender, we never even thought of that. But it was, in the Catholic community, they were called, if at all, homosexuals. And I had only heard the word the previous year, when I was in graduate school where I did my master's at Notre Dame, I found out what a homosexual was. So I was very innocent. But when I met Dominic and listened to his story, and that we need to know how powerful our stories are. And his story said to me that whatever images I had from society, they were not what I heard from Dominic. So I don't know how to say. I really, in terms of church, I guess, I knew that the church thought homosexuals were bad or wrong. In fact, Dominic told me in his youth, when he went to confession, he was thrown out of the confessional, told he was going to hell, so he never went back. So, and I knew that was not the way of Jesus. And so I never thought, really, that acting on one's same-sex feelings was wrong if there was love involved. And to me, the measure of any action ethically is it caring, is it loving? And so I, at vacation time, went back to my community to talk with my provincial, to tell them about this group of people that I had met, because I met Dominic and his friends, and we began to have liturgies in their homes, in their apartments, because this was right after Vatican II, 1971, and the church was in a turmoil. It was exciting times. I don't know how many of you can remember those who are of my vintage probably can remember those really exciting days in the church. So I went back to Baltimore, spoke with my provincial, and I really had this. You mentioned the School Sisters of Notre Dame. We were a middle of the road community, I would say, but at that time all communities were like becoming up to date, shall I say, because it was Pius XII who had asked communities to begin a renewal. But my leaders were women, I think, far ahead of the rest of the community. And the advice I got from my provincial was that the church had neglected this group of people, and do whatever you can, to reach out and extend the loving hand of the church and of God. So I had a great community.
Yeah. I think that's a piece of our history that we forget, that, in the 70s in particular, and early 80s, much of the church, certainly religious women's communities of religious men, and many dioceses were actually, took very pastoral, very responsive, very positive approaches to the issues of homosexuals or gay and lesbian, and really tried to sort of figure this out along with us. I mean, there were obviously those who didn't.
Right.
But, we forget that there was so much good that happened in, social justice work and our community at that time.
Especially with the nuns.
Especially with the nuns. Oh, especially with the nuns. So you went on to work with Dominic. I know that, there were gatherings in people's homes and in other places, and eventually Dignity was born with your assistance and the community. I wonder if you could talk about a particular moment in Dignity Philadelphia's history that has particular relevance and meaning for you and for the many years of ministry, the many decades of ministry with our community that you have engaged in?
Well, one of the meaningful moments was having those Eucharists at Dominic's apartment and the homes of his friends, and we had a number of priests who would celebrate liturgy, and one of them, of course, was Bob Nugent. And when I left Philadelphia to go to Baltimore to teach at our community's college, Bob was here with some of the other priests here, and the group became the Dignity chapter. But I think what propelled me to continue, if you will, is Dominic was very persistent, and Dominic loved and saw the value of media. So he had arranged, and then he told me, he had arranged an interview with the Philadelphia newspaper to interview me, and there was this big article in the style section, "Nun meets with gays in convent," you know. But it's important. I mean, I think that the significant, because it said to me, it's good and needed to have pastoral ministry in the private sphere, but it can't stop there. It has to be public. And as a result of that article, and I mentioned most of Philadelphia is really Catholic then and now, as a result of that article, I received several dozen letters, to me. Well, I sent them to the paper, and the paper forwarded them to me, and 2/3 of the letters were positive. In 1971, 2/3 of the people who took the time to write thought this was something the church should be doing. And I think that's very significant. And of course, one of the letters that I got was from a priest named Robert Nugent. And then he closed with, "If there's anything I can do, let me know." Of course, then he became one of the celebrants. But then he said, "Well, I've never said those words again," But to get back to your question, I think there were many significant moments, but I think the significance was that article, because it said to me, we need not hide this. We need to be public. If it's something good, don't hide your light under the bushel, all right? Put it out for all to see. And that's what Dignity has done. And thanks to you, Marianne, you're a great one for making the light of the LGBT Catholic community shine.
Well, it's a community thing. Thank you.
Our theme for Dignity Philadelphia's 50th anniversary is celebrating our past, present, and future. Mm-hmm. And thinking about the present for a moment, Sister Jeannine, what do you think are the most pressing issues related to LGBTQ plus people today, especially for those people and allies who are Catholic? And what do you believe the role of Catholics should be in addressing these issues?
Okay. Well, as I just finished saying, the importance of being public, and public, not just the newspaper, but speaking out, I think the importance for LGBT Catholics is to tell stories, to talk with people that you know, that are friends, maybe people that you just meet. Just wearing a button can start a conversation in a public place, if you're in a train or a bus station, whatever. But I think the importance for us today is to not be silent, because silence is violence. We need to speak up. So I think that's one role that we have. In terms of the institutional church, I think what we need today and should be working toward is to examine the sexual ethics teaching of the church. Now, theologians have done that with the past papacies. The Vatican has pushed back and silenced the theologians, but we're in a different moment. We're in a moment now where theologians have the ability to speak out and not receive sanctions. In fact, Pope Francis in 2015 addressed a group of theologians and told them to write. You know, there have been no silencings in this pontificate. So I think that's very important. So what can we do? We can help support theologians that we know, or any kind of theological discussion, raise the theological issues. Now, frankly, I don't think that sexual ethics, I mean, we have to put it in its place. We need to revamp it and change it from a procreative ethic to an ethic of love and care and relationship. But in the grand scheme of things, the important teaching of the church really is the social justice teaching of the church. So that's what I think an important issue for today is, that we need to underline and underscore when people talk about, oh, the teaching of the church. What about the social justice teaching of the church, which is much more important than sexual ethics? I mean, sexual ethics has changed over the centuries. I mean, many people don't know, and I didn't know until I read this, before, that St. Augustine taught that if a husband and a wife had sexual intercourse but did not procreate a child as a result of that one act, they were sinning. Now, do we teach that today? No. But we've still hung on to that procreative ethic, right? Well, we need to, I think, move on to what current theologians are telling us about love and relationships.
Thank you so much. You had mentioned what it was like 50 plus years ago when you first started learning about the LGBT community, and many things have happened over the years. I'm wondering, can you speak to what you believe have been wins to celebrate over the last 10 to 15, just looking back a few, especially things that we can celebrate in terms of equity, inclusion, and justice for LGBTQ plus people in the church?
Well, one big win, of course, is Pope Francis and the fact of his coming out publicly for decriminalization. And that, that probably doesn't affect us too much in the US, but in terms of LGBT people across the world, we know how many countries still penalize and some countries put to death people who are lesbian, gay, or bisexual, transgender. I think in terms of the church, what we can celebrate is what's happening now in Western Europe. I'm speaking about the German church, the church in Austria and Belgium and Switzerland and France and even Italy, because there have been a number of new bishops appointed in Italy because of Pope Francis. And Italy, the church in Italy is very pro-gay at this point. Yeah. At least that's what I hear from my friends there. So I'm very excited about the wins that we have had in the church. And of course, in terms of the political situation here, same-sex marriage in 2015, but also the fact that there are bishops in Germany blessing same-sex unions and calling for sacramentalizing this union. So I think we are in exciting times, especially with the synod coming up. The bishops coming together, and now Pope Francis has not only the bishops, he wants lay people there, men and women, and not just sitting there and listening, but contributing and voting. So we are in exciting times in our church. These are lots of wins that I never thought I'd see. I don't know about you, but I remember in going through the ordeal with the Vatican, one of the questions from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith was, have you ever spoken about gay marriage? Well, frankly, Bob Nugent and I never even thought of it. I mean, never thought it would be an issue in the church, so we never thought of it, but it was in their minds. So, but now we can celebrate that, and there are bishops who are talking about the justice of having marriages for same-sex couples. So these are just some of the wins that come to my mind.
I'm going a little off script here.
That's okay.
But it's so wonderful to hear all of the things, of course, that we have to celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would also be remiss not to say that it is a little bit of a scary time right now, especially for trans folks in the United States, with so many laws trying to litigate those people out of existence.
Right.
And I want to ask you a question about the future, but before I do,
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't know, myself included, you mentioned briefly the challenges with the Vatican, and I'm wondering if you can speak to those, because I'm sure this journey of including LGBTQ folks in the Catholic Church has not always been an easy one, not full of just celebrations, but hard things too. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Right. Before I get to the Vatican, I do want to mention the U.S. Church. The U.S. bishops are not, by and large, there are exceptions, but by and large, the U.S. bishops are not fans of Pope Francis. Most of them have been appointed by his two predecessors, and we're just waiting for them to get to age 75 so they can be replaced. But the Vatican on trans issues, well, as many of you know, the Vatican Congregation, well, it used to be called the Congregation for Education, came out with a document about trans people, which was good in many respects, but in the final analysis, it wasn't, because it talked about this, it uses the terminology that really, well, annoys me and us, of gender ideology. That word, the word ideology in the minds of people at the Vatican, Pope Francis, anyone who used that word, not anyone, but many people use the word ideology, they mean it in a negative sense, not realizing that we all have ideologies, but if you want to condemn something, you say, oh, well, it's just an ideology. So gender ideology is a hammer, I believe, that is used against transgender people and those who love them. So this document that came out talked about gender ideology. And as you mentioned, there are, in the political arena, we have politicians trying to get laws on the books against transgender people, but also we have bishops who push this gender ideology, and they're writing guidelines, terrible guidelines for their dioceses, about what should be happening in schools, and you can't let children use the pronouns that they feel belong to them. So, so what was your question?
I don't know if I had one, but you spoke to that beautifully, so thank you.
I lost my train of thought, but oh, I know what I was going to say. So, I have a little correspondence with Pope Francis, and so I did write in one letter, I wrote to him and told him about this wonderful woman who I know who is transgender. And I said, I just wish you could meet her, because before she transitioned, she knew in her heart that something was not right, that her spirit, her soul, did not match her body. She had a masculine body, but in her spirit, in her soul, she was female, she was feminine. And I said, when she transitioned, she felt that her body and spirit were one. And isn't that what we are to be? Like one, whole, a whole person, one in mind, body, and spirit. And I said, and I happen to worship in a faith community in Washington, D.C., and she is part of the faith community, and we have these dialogue homilies. And when she gets up to speak, it's like, she's like a preacher. She's beautiful because she speaks from her heart. And I just said, I wish you could meet her. Well, his response was, I wish I had had a different response. His response was, the person, yes, the ideology, no. So he still needs education, you know. And he's educable because he's admitted he makes mistakes. You know, when he was in provincial, he was a very young Jesuit provincial in Argentina and made lots of mistakes during that dirty war in Argentina. But he said in his first public interview in 2013, he said that he was young, he was too young, and he didn't listen. He said, I was very authoritarian, didn't listen. He said, but you know, he now knows that you must listen and reflect, and he's a man of prayer and reflects a lot. And so I think there's hope. There's hope. I think there's always hope.
Well, I think that's a beautiful segue into what your hopes or thoughts are for the future. Not all of us have a personal dialogue with the Pope, so I'm glad you are one of those folks who are working to educate him.
Yeah.
But I just wonder what, you know, celebrating our past, present, and future, what are your thoughts, hopes for the Catholic Church and the LGBTQ community as we look ahead to hopefully the next 50 years?
Okay. Well, I hope that LGBTQ would not be an issue. I talk sometimes about my preferred future, and I try to sometimes live in that preferred future. You know, there was a time when being left-handed was considered odd. And we teachers, you know, we made children write with their right hand because that was the right thing to do. You can't write with your left hand. But now, who cares if you're left-handed or right-handed? Nobody cares, all right? And, well, maybe, you know, people who had red hair stood out. You know, well, who cares if you have red hair, black hair, brown hair, white hair, or no hair, you know. So, so who cares? That's what I call like domesticating the issue. It's a non-issue. And, or in my era growing up, in the 50s, and I guess early 60s, you know, well, no, it changed but when the hippies came along. But in my era, boys couldn't have long hair, because that was like a girl, you know. But now, who cares? Men have long hair, women have long hair or short hair. It doesn't matter. So my hope for the future is that we just don't consider LGBTQ an issue, you know. And in terms of the church or in terms of society, a non-issue. And I'll just go further too about sexuality. I do believe in sexual ethics, but I think that sexual ethics is a personal, it's personal, but I do believe we should have some, well, I guess, we learn from our friends, and we learn from people I think that we admire. So anyway, that's it.
Well, we're now in the time of folks from the audience. If you have any questions for Sister Jeannine, now is the time. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a mic. We'll run it out to you. You can ask your question, and then I'll repeat the question just so we can all hear it and we capture it on camera. So you can raise your hand if you have one, and we'll run the mic out to you.
Hi, sister. Thank you for being here today. When I was growing up, I had a spiritual advisor. His name was Monsignor Charles Devlin, and he was stationed at St. John on 13th Street.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, did you have any interactions with him?
No. No, I don't know him.
You don't know him?
No.
He always said that he helped start the gay transition. I always told him he was a liar.
No. Well, even though I didn't know Father Devlin, he may have been telling the truth, because there is a ministry at St. John's in the parish. You're talking about the one on 13th Street. Yes, and they have been for years. It was quiet, wasn't known, but for many, many years, I know that gay people would go there and talk with the priests there, who were very understanding. So that might be what he meant.
Other question? The question was asked about Father James Morton and your work or knowledge of him, and his dialogue with Pope Francis also.
Right. Yes. Yes, Jim is a good friend of mine, and when I first met him, which was a number of years ago, he told me how the ministry of Father Nugent, that Father Nugent and I were doing, was very impactful in his own life. So that was nice to hear. And of course, he has had a great effect because of his media. You know, I talked about the importance of being public, and he has great well, he's a Jesuit, so of course they have great connections. And so through America Media, has been able to publicize the LGBT issue very much, and he got heavily involved after the Orlando fiasco at the nightclub. And so I applaud everything that Father James Martin is doing, because he's a great ally, and he's able to influence Pope Francis. So we are blessed that we have him.
So the question was about, Sister Jeannine, your response to Pope Benedict's passing and also his legacy. And there was a request also to tell the airplane story, which those of us who were at the dance last night were lucky enough to hear, but it bears worth repeating.
Well, as I mentioned America Media, so they had asked, the people in the media prepare, gosh, what do they call them when somebody?
Memorials, tributes.
This is a senior moment.
Obituaries?
Part obituary, that's exactly. Well, yeah, it is an obituary. And so I wrote a piece, which they published when Pope Benedict died, former Pope Benedict. And I recounted his involvement with LGBT issues, and that was not very positive because of the letter in 1986, of course, and we won't go into all of the negatives. But in the end, I said that, and part of what I shared with you last evening, that he was really a victim of the clerical system, a victim of his times, in which he followed the rules to the T. In fact, when I was going through my investigation with the Vatican, my Superior General asked if we could have a face-to-face meeting. And he said, no, that was not part of the process that they engage in. In fact, the Vatican had appointed some theologians to defend Father Nugent and myself, unbeknownst to us. that we had already had our defense, and we didn't even know it, you know. So no, he would not meet with us. So then I told the story that that was my superior general who made the request, and she was denied. But my provincial said she was very worried, and we needed a miracle because I was going to get excommunicated, and we better go to Munich where our foundress was buried, so that we could pray for a miracle so I could still stay in the church, right? So we were boarding a plane in Rome to go to Munich, where the mother house is, and we see someone who looks like Pope, well, he wasn't Pope Benedict then, who looked like Cardinal Ratzinger at the time. And so he got on the plane, and when he got on the plane, there was a seat empty next to him, so I sat down and asked, I said, are you a priest? Because he had on a black clerical shirt. And he said, yes, he was a priest, and he was, I said, I was a school sister of Notre Dame. Do you know the school sisters? Yes, my aunt is a school sister, or was a school sister. She had since died. And so that's how I knew it was Cardinal Ratzinger, because I knew he had an aunt in our community. So, and this was cute. And I said, well, you know, I'm Sister Jeannine. Oh, he says, yes. He says, I have known you for 20 years. The file had been accumulating for 20 years. So I really told him the story about Dominic, and that we were meeting in Philadelphia and having a mass for LGBT. Oh, I didn't say jail. I said lesbian and gay Catholics in Philadelphia, and he thought that was wonderful. He thought that was very good that we would have mass for gay and lesbian Catholics. But he says, but you go to dioceses and you give workshops. The public, see, you can do things in private, but when it's public, that's another dimension, and that's where church officials get really nervous. And so I said, yes, Father Nugent and I go to dioceses and we give public workshops. Oh, and do the bishops invite you, he said? No, I said, well, some do and some don't. And when they don't, we go to the mother houses of the nuns. So we have most of our workshops were in mother houses or retreat houses of women religious. They've been, you just trust the nuns. And former nuns too. So we had a conversation for about 20 minutes, and I must say that I feel he was a very spiritual person, because when I sat down next to him, and several times in the conversation, I could hear him say, like under his breath, providence. I mean, he just said providence. And I think what he was thinking was that my superior general had asked if he would meet with me, and he said no. And now Providence had decreed that we would meet. It's going to happen. So God, the Spirit, intervened. So, and he was praying his breviary, you know, when I interrupted him. So he was a man of prayer. So, you know, I do think he was like a prisoner, so to speak, of his times, as many of us are. I mean, we all can probably look back on our history and say, I was captive in this moment of time. But in the final analysis, when I wrote that obituary about him, it was like a reflection. I said his legacy, because they wanted me to talk about his legacy. Well, I talked about his legacy, the negative part, but I think that the greatest legacy that he left us was what he wrote after Vatican II. You know, he was a Peritus, one of the theologians, the liberal theologians at Vatican II. And after the documents of Vatican II were published, he wrote about them, and he said that the greatest thing in the teaching of the church was the teaching on conscience, and that everyone is bound to follow your conscience, even though it would go against whatever the teaching of the church or whatever anyone says if you in your heart are convinced by God that something is right, you have an obligation to follow your conscience. And I think that was his greatest legacy, to tell us about the importance of conscience.
I'll never be as eloquent in saying back that question, but essentially, Sister Jeannine, if you could speak to your thoughts about how shifting away from a procreative ethic to one of love could impact the role of women in the church.
Well, first of all, it would impact the role of women because it's a change, and any change is positive for women because we need to, it propels the movement for change. And at the risk of I don't like stereotypes, but women have been stereotyped as being caring and loving and warm, and men, and it's the culture that has put this upon males to be strong and don't show your feelings, the stiff upper lip if you're British. So I want us to get away from those cultural stereotypes, but at the same time, because of those cultural stereotypes and people still having lingering stereotypes, that will propel us, I believe, to, if we move to an ethic of love, it will help us to see women in a more positive way, and the role of women as being equal to men. But I'd like to rely on St. Paul's letter to the Galatians. There is neither male nor female, Greek nor Jew, or Gentile. So it's the culture can help us, but I think the scriptures can help us too.
So what can we do, Sister Jeannine, to carry on your legacy, the legacy of the work of Dignity Philadelphia, this group that you helped to start, and also of New Ways Ministry, if you wanted to talk a little bit about that?
I believe that, as I said, in a future where LGBTQ is not an issue, being male or female is not a big issue, but we have work to do. So what is that work? I think we didn't mention that there are more LGBT-friendly parishes now than there used to be. Several hundred, about 300 now in the U.S. Well, that's a drop in the bucket, when you think of the thousands, several thousand of parishes that we have. So you mentioned St. John's. Well, we need to educate people in the parishes. So that's one thing that Dignity Philadelphia can do, like a speakers bureau, to go out and to evangelize in the name of the LGBTQ community, Catholic community. Of course, we already mentioned evangelizing or speaking or telling your story to family and friends, but more than family and friends, I would hope that we would have a big microphone, paper, in the newspaper, articles in the newspaper. If you have good writers, to write an op-ed, or letters to the editor. Find something that you can write a letter to the editor, like get a hook that you can put LGBTQ up, and put that in the letter to the editor, because if you consider articles in the newspaper, most people read letters to the editor more so than other sections of the newspaper. So it's very important that we write letters to the editor. And don't forget your pastors or your bishops. Write letters to the bishop, but always, whether it's a letter to the editor, or if you're speaking with someone, or if it's a letter to your bishop, always, I don't want to say reverential, that's not the right word, but polite. What is it? You get more honey attracts more flies than vinegar. So don't rail, you know. Certainly tell your story and the anguish that some of us have faced, but no blame, you know, because people will resonate with you if you speak from the heart. So they're my suggestions.
Well, thank you so much, Sister Jeannine. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you to everyone for being here. I realized my hand was shaking as I went to pick up some water, and I think that is because I really, throughout the course of this conversation, it sunk in all the wisdom and work and leadership and impact of who I'm sitting up here with today. So thank you both so much. Two things that I wanted to just close up with here before we break down for Mass is something you said about conscience and you know, what we all believe to be true and what we know about ourselves as LGBTQ people and Catholics, and especially the intersection of those folks to continue doing what we know to be right. And thank you for your leadership and example in that. And also, we hadn't planned this because the 50th anniversary has been booked for well over a year, but we are heading into Pride Month next month.
Yeah.
And what you mentioned about not only, you know, celebrating ourselves and our community with ourselves, but also out and proudly in front of other people, I think is really important. So thank you so much for being here and for helping us kick off Pride Month and for celebrating our 50th anniversary.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It was fun. Thank you.